So Raghu, you'll mute all at, at some point.
What is that?
No, will you do the mute?
Oh, I think they can, once I'll make her the co-host, so she should be able to unmute and share her screen.
Right. So, okay, we'll mute all and then.
Yeah,
okay.
So generally the questions are in the end, right? I would assume.
Yeah.
And they can type them if they want to.
Right.
So you can just say that in the beginning.
Right. Samya is here.
Good afternoon, sir. I'm Andrea, her assistant. She'll be with you in 2 minutes. She's just finishing another call.
Perfect. Right. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
So I have just made her the co-host.
That's fine. Yeah.
Good afternoon, Vijay.
Good afternoon, Samya. Wonderful. Thank you for joining. I think I will mute all. And Raghu, are you going to make some initial comments?
I think you can introduce her.
I'll just get started. Okay. So I'm going to mute all, and then Samya, please unmute yourself.
Okay.
Does that work? I'm unmuted. And you need to unmute yourself, I think, Samya.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Good. Thank you. So let's get started. I think right on time. So namaskara. I think on behalf of Art Park, which is the DST Government of Karnataka funded innovation hub for AI and robotics at IISc, the Bosch Center for Cyber-Physical Systems, and the Indian Institute of Science, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Samya Swaminathan and welcome her to this specially arranged public lecture as we conclude the two-day symposium on cyber-physical systems. Thank you, Dr. Swaminathan, for taking the time to be with us. Our former Secretary for Health Research and Director General of ICMR, Dr. Swaminathan, is now the first Chief Scientist of WHO, the World Health Organization. She has been deeply engaged with the idea that digital health and AI can make a difference. Back in 2019, some of you will recall, there was the blueprint for digital health, which WHO and the Ministry of Health had put out for comments, and we discussed this at IISc, and this guided our digital health initiatives on campus. About artificial intelligence for health, Dr. Swaminathan has written that AI has enormous potential for strengthening the delivery of healthcare and medicine and helping all countries achieve universal health coverage. This includes improved diagnosis and clinical care, enhancing health research, drug discovery, drug development, and assisting with the deployment of different public health interventions, such as disease surveillance, outbreak response, and health systems management. This paragraph is actually borrowed from her foreword to the recent WHO guidance on the ethics and governance of AI for health, about which she will speak to us today. We have requested Dr. Swaminathan to speak for about 20 minutes about the guidance, and then we'll have a little time for questions. So those of you who have questions, please type them into the comments box so we can track them. With that, it's over to you, Dr. Swaminathan.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Vijay, and greetings to all your colleagues and friends who are attending this conference. This is obviously a new area and an interesting area, and the reason that I think Vijay also invited me to speak was because the WHO has very recently come out with a guidance document on the ethics and governance of artificial intelligence in health. And Vijay was mentioning this, the foreword to this document, in which, you know, we have also quoted Stephen Hawking, who said that our future is a race between the growing power of technology and the wisdom with which we use it. This quote from the famous physicist reminds us also of both the opportunities and challenges that new technologies bring to the health sector, but also beyond the health sector. I think all sectors today are impacted by artificial intelligence to a greater or lesser degree. The WHO created a science division in 2019, and it was essentially done to harness the power of science and technology and innovation, and to make sure that WHO remains at the cutting edge of science, but also that we leverage all of these new technologies, which include AI, but also things like, you know, gene editing and gene drive technologies, epigenetics, you know, the power of big data, machine learning, and all of that, in order to all of which actually pose, you know, they have transformational opportunities, but also could pose risks to people. And I think that's what I want to focus on today. I have a presentation that I'm now going to share with you, and then we can obviously have some discussion at the end. I hope you can see my presentation.
Yes, it's coming up.
Okay,
yeah, there it is. Yeah.
We go into slideshow mode. Yeah. Okay. So why did we pick on this topic? Because I don't need to tell this group, I guess, that AI is a very fast growing sector, trillions of dollars, and that it has numerous health care applications, that it offers opportunities to strengthen healthcare, health research, drug discovery and development, improve diagnosis, timely public health surveillance, and particularly in areas of the world where there is a shortage of healthcare personnel and specialists, AI could fill some of those gaps. But it also poses significant ethical challenges and could undermine human rights protections. And we've seen during the COVID pandemic that there were many applications that were used by countries, particularly those around contact tracing, that were operated in different ways in different countries, some of them with more and some with less regulations around privacy and confidentiality. So WHO, of course, is uniquely placed to both identify how AI can maximize countries' efforts to achieve universal health coverage while ensuring human rights and ethics are at the center of the design and deployment of AI for health. So we set up an expert group. This was about 18 months ago, actually. Yeah, it was just before the pandemic, actually, in October of 2019. And the group, the remit of this group was to identify the ethical challenges and develop guiding principles, also to develop an ethical framework which could form the basis of a governance system of artificial intelligence for health, and to make some recommendations both to WHO as well as to other intergovernmental agencies, also to ministries in countries, not just ministries of health, but in this case, I think ministries beyond health are also concerned, also to companies, programmers, the big tech giants, health providers, and civil society. So we had 20 international experts. The groups are always balanced across gender and across geographic region. And it was co-chaired by Partha Mazumdar from India and Effie Vayana from Switzerland. And this is the composition of the expert group. We had one more Indian on this group. I think, yes, it was Roli Mathur from Bangalore, in fact, from the ICMR. She's in charge of the ethics guidelines of ICMR. So there was one in-person meeting, and then they had to switch to virtual meetings. This, of course, the virtual format enabled us to invite a number of different external speakers and stakeholders to share perspectives and exchange ideas. And this group actually also did look at this proximity tracking applications that I was talking about. And the WHO, in fact, throughout the COVID pandemic has been putting out guidance around the ethics of different issues that have come up, So one of them is this, the proximity tracking applications and the ethics of using such programs and apps, but also we've done on human challenge studies, we've done on mandatory vaccination and on these vaccine passports and many other such issues. So this report that I'm talking about was launched on just a few weeks ago on the 28th of June. And essentially, I've shared the link here and I'm happy to share the slides. It gives you the definition of AI and applications for health. There are consensus principles. It outlines the ethical challenges and risks. And then it talks about the governance, and then it has checklists, which are more practical for implementation. These checklists are for three groups of people. One is for ministries, to develop laws and regulations and rules and frameworks to govern. The second are for developers, the technology people. And the third set of checklists are for the hospitals, healthcare providers, and those who are going to use these applications. So the ethical challenges identified by the group are listed here, starting with when should AI be used. We need to know actually what is the use case and why are we doing this. We have to keep in mind the digital divide. So we should not be in a situation where in a country like India, we are further excluding those who are already excluded from access to healthcare just because the same people who are, the most marginalized also are the least likely to have access to smartphones and to the internet access. We have to pay a lot of attention to how the data is collected and used. There has to be some accountability and responsibility for the use of AI. Autonomous decision making, when it's autonomous, then ultimately who takes the responsibility for that. Bias and discrimination, I think everybody is very familiar with the fact that the AI algorithms are only as good as the data, and if the data is not representative of the population, then you're not going to have a good application. Risks of AI to safety and cybersecurity, the impacts of AI on labor and employment in healthcare and medicine. So are we actually replacing human beings? And my own belief is that you cannot replace human beings in the healthcare setting. It can only be used as a tool to further support and strengthen what human beings are doing and to make them more effective. The challenges in commercialization of artificial intelligence for healthcare, and then finally artificial intelligence and climate change. So these were some of the challenges that were identified. The principles that the committee identified was, first of all, to protect autonomy. This is one of the fundamental ethical principles of around justice, human rights. Promoting human well-being, human safety, and the public interest has to be paramount. There has to be transparency, explainability, and intelligibility. We need to foster responsibility, accountability, ensure inclusiveness and equity, and promoting AI that is responsive and sustainable. Then they went into the governance itself and discussed the legal, regulatory, and non-legal measures for the ethical use of AI for health. And they identified areas of governance that could both resolve the identified challenges we just talked about, the ethical challenges, and integrate the 6 consensus principles. So they've got a number of recommendations in this report. In fact, there are 47 recommendations for these 3 groups of stakeholders that I talked about. And just to give you an example, one for designers would be that you have to design AI systems to perform well-defined tasks with accuracy and reliability necessary to improve the capacity of health systems and advance patient interests. So we don't want to use an AI-based tool which is not enhancing the efficiency or the efficacy and safety of something, whether it could be an automated X-ray reading algorithm, it could be reading pathology slides, it could be doing other kinds of support with diagnostics, for patients. But this is something that designers need to keep in mind, and it needs to be tested. Then they say what governments should do, and that's around, of course, having the laws, the policies, the frameworks to govern this, and to have a system whereby you provide the government should provide the guidance to developers, but also very importantly, we need the regulatory systems. So particularly when we're talking about medical devices, and this is an area of work that I think WHO would also like to pursue, is to have this conversation with the medical device regulators to say how you would approach a new device that was based on AI. How would that actually be tested, validated, and then approved for use in a particular population? And in fact, this is coming because we are involved in the development of there are several tools, in fact, for the detection of cervical cancer using AI to actually do the reading of the pictures that the camera is taking, of the cervix of the woman. And clearly the algorithm has to be trained. And if you're going to have differences in this performance between countries, then this is something that the regulators absolutely need to be aware of. Further, there needs to be impact assessments of these technologies. So it's not enough to just give the one-time clearance, but what governments, what institutions should be looking at is a constant sort of evaluation once it is implemented, and see whether the outcomes that we want are actually getting achieved or not. Then for companies, they've talked about, of course, adhering to national and international laws and regulations. Now, we don't really have, as far as I know, international regulations that all companies can adhere to on the development, commercialization, and use of AI, but this is clearly necessary. And again, this is an area of work for WHO with UNESCO and other partners who are interested in this area. Of course, UNESCO has a much broader remit. WHO is interested mainly in the health applications. And then, of course, our member states are very interested in this. And what's happening now is that clearly the high-income countries have thought about this and have brought in rules and laws around data protection and how they're going to regulate these things. But the low and middle income countries really have not had the time to sit and think about this or to put in place systems. So we would like to really work with the low and middle income countries to ensure that the development and particularly the diffusion of AI technologies is in accordance with the ethical norms, human rights protections, and legal obligations. And in fact, I was just discussing with my colleague earlier today about whether we should actually be developing a model legislation for countries instead of asking every country to develop something. We could maybe help support that. And so when you look at our document, obviously I've given a very high level overview, but there's a lot of detail, a lot of context, and a lot of additional information in this document. And it has these checklists, which are the practical steps to assist with implementation. And as I said, there are checklists for designers and programmers, for ministries of health, and for hospital systems and healthcare professionals and providers. And obviously these are principles, and then they need to be used and adopted while we're implementing. So again, it's a learning process. It's probably something like a living guideline, which will need to be updated as we gather more information, more experience. What we would like to focus on is to use this also. We have a global strategy on digital health. So the WHO had developed this over the last 2 years, and it was approved in the World Health Assembly last year. And there is a plan, a 10-year plan for how countries must digitalize their health systems and move ahead. And I think we've learned a lot in the pandemic also about the need for good data systems, surveillance, integrated data platforms, and also ways and means to share data, not only nationally, but globally for global collaboration. So this guideline can hopefully help us and help countries as we roll out this digital health strategy. There needs to be some kind of plans of action developed at the country and regional level. So we will work through our regional offices to provide country support to ministries of health, to ethics committees and others who might ask for that support. We want to continue with having a community of practice. So now this expert group has developed this guideline, shouldn't be the end of it. So we need to keep this dialogue and discussion going. We also work with the International Telecommunications Union, because they have obviously a lot of, they work with phone companies and other tech companies. But now WHO has also started working directly with many tech companies, particularly during the pandemic. And engaging with other organizations, as I said, like OECD, UNESCO, and others. And then we will need to disseminate these guidelines. So we are planning a number of workshops in the coming months. So I think I will stop there. But again, with a reminder that we need to ensure that the digital health revolution, which is taking place now, is inclusive, sustainable, and safe, and does not leave anyone behind. Thank you, Vijay. Back to you.
Thank you, Soumya, for a very quick but very thorough overview of the document. I would encourage all developers, many of whom are on this call, to go take a look and particularly read the checklist, the appendix for developers. I think it has some useful gems there. I would like to just start off with a question that I have, and then there's one in the chat window, so I will get to that. My first question is that, at Art Park, we've been fairly proactive in thinking about issues of ethics and AI for health particularly. And we've, had some discussions around, the idea that perhaps the traditional IRBs or ethics committees, institutional ethics committees that you would go to, actually, there's a little bit of difficulty in explaining, the AI applications to them. There's a little unfamiliarity with what AI does, and quite often, the very extreme views on AI do come up. Is there a guidance for setting up the right kind of IRBs for reviewing AI for health proposals. We've, would it actually make sense to set up our own IRB, or has WHO given this issue any thought, right? Or the expert committee, right? Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that's a really great question, Vijay. Obviously, I think people have only started now thinking about this issue. And as I said, one of the things we want to do is to raise awareness around this report and all the questions that it raises with, ethics committees and countries, with national regulatory authorities, etc., and really start engaging with them in a dialogue. So I think it's a very good point. And I will talk to my colleagues about what we can do, but through our network of ethics committees, perhaps come up with some guidance, because traditionally ethics committees may not involve people with this expertise in this field,
Right.
So
right.
now that health ethics committees will need to start looking at this topic, they need to include people with this. They could be included on an ad hoc basis, or I don't think we should have a separate ethics committee, but should be expanded with the necessary expertise. So I think that's a very good suggestion for both follow-up at WHO, but also at the national level. And I can also pass this on to Roli Mathur, who can take it up with the ICMR in India.
Yeah. So we have now some questions piling up in the chat window. So I'll quickly run through some of them. One is, of course, on the global issue of AI being in the hands of private corporations, and how does one ensure that AI is used in the public interest? And a particular note there that, and this is from Devdutt Dubashi at Chalmers in Sweden. DeepMind has made its database of protein structures public, and also open sourced its code. And AlphaFold, which came out of DeepMind, is actually one of the landmark developments in computational AI. Could this model be made kind of an exemplar for companies using AI in health? Right? And, so it's sort of a regulatory question, and perhaps importantly a global one. So maybe WHO is the right agency to think about that.
I think it's a very good step that DeepMind has taken. There are more and more such initiatives, and I don't know if it can be made mandatory, but certainly,
Right.
We're talking a lot about, the WHO has been talking a lot about the new models for R&D, because, we've been talking, everyone's discussing the TRIPS waiver, which is being discussed at the WTO for specifically for COVID vaccines and products. But it's a bit much broader issue, really. I think that public investment in R&D, government investment in R&D, then should lead to information or products that are available to the public as a public good. So yes, I think it's a model that should be certainly encouraged. Whether it can be made mandatory, I don't know, but this is an area of work, as I mentioned, WHO would like to take further, because we know that tech companies, especially the big ones, have a lot of power and control over data, and they definitely need to play ball if any of this is going to be successful. I think there's also a question about autonomy. I see in the chat.
Yes, yeah, you see that. Good.
Yeah.
And the elaboration, of complex decision-making scenarios and autonomy. Yeah. Please go ahead. Yeah.
I think all of these questions are complex. I don't have any good answers as such to any of them. Mm-hmm. For example, even the issue of can you collect data? Can hospitals, which happens now, basically hand over the data to a company that then aggregates data and then maybe perhaps sells it to other companies or even academic researchers, etc. And there is a whole concept of data altruism, where people are willingly, would give up their health data for applications. But again, we cannot presume that something can be done on the basis of data altruism. This discussion needs to happen, I think, with public and civil society. I know a few countries where there's so much of trust in the system, in the government, that Estonia is an example where the citizens are willing to it's a completely digital country, and the government has all the data from citizens, and then they use it actually for citizens' benefit. And there is a trust relationship there. But in most other countries, that's not the case. And so I think it's an area for debate as to, yes, it would be really good to have a large amount of health data accessible to people who can then use it to develop programs or use it to do analyses to further improve health outcomes. But you have extreme positions. On the one hand, you have extreme data protection, confidentiality, where nothing can be touched, and on the other hand, you have no regulation, where anyone can pick up data, and the private sector basically operating unregulated. So we need to find a balance between the two, and I think this has to come from debates, within civil society, and there needs to be a balanced approach that countries must take to this. So I think.
Yeah. I just want to add a little follow up to that the issue of autonomy, and also India has been kind of in the front in some ways in thinking through this whole business of data protection and non-personal data versus personal data, and making that distinction. And Chris Gopalakrishnan and the committee's proposal on non-personal data, and also how the benefits from this data can flow back to communities and the sources of data, which I think is a pretty radical idea, and might be a model that could be developed further for particularly the lower income countries that WHO may be advising. So just a comment there. I'm not so sure that things are well developed enough right now, but I think there's something interesting there. I think let's take one more minute of your time, if you don't mind. And there's a question about citizen participation and capacity building and so on, but let me pose it in a slightly different way. And one of the challenges is that when there's a use of AI for health put out on social media, various sort of advisories that come up on social media, obviously there's a big issue of the credibility of some of these advisories that come out. And in fact, the National Academy of Medicine has very recently put out the discussion paper, which I've been reading, and it's called Identifying Credible Sources of Health Information in Social Media. And the idea of calling out misinformation is quite complex. I mean, there's various protocols, the CPGs, the CRAP test, the SIFT test, URAC, etc. So, but this looks like an ideal application for an AI system. And if one were to able to, if say WHO commissioned a kind of, universal, sort of credibility checker, right? Which could be, could be revised from time to time, of course. And but that might actually be one way in which kind of standard on this, because some of it is very dangerous, which is, we all know that, you'll get some really crazy advice on social media, and, that could really harm people. So any thoughts on that? Yeah.
Yeah, we have been faced with that, of course, quite a bit.
Right.
It was always there, but it really, I think, reached epic proportions during the pandemic, just because
right.
of the number of people who are out there on social media, and the
Yeah.
so the term infodemic was coined.
Right.
And in fact, there was a big infodemic conference that was organized here, and it was about communicating science, but also about this question of credible information versus not. There isn't an easy way. We have been engaged. So what we do is we scan social media and report to YouTube or Facebook or whichever, Twitter, whichever platform it is, anything that we see as misinformation, we flag it. And all of these tech companies have committed to removing misinformation. So they have their own systems in place for screening.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm not sure what algorithms they use, but we also get back to them, and then they remove that immediately when it's flagged by WHO as not being credible or being misinformation. But I think what you're suggesting is that we develop some kind of, a diagnostic for misinformation, a metric. Which,
exactly. Yeah. So a kind of an expert committee approach to building such a system. Of course, we could involve DeepMind and groups like that, which could be very helpful. But it would. Yeah. I think to have more citizen participation. Right.
More citizen participation, yes.
Right.
And yes, I think that's worth thinking about. Of course, it would go across a range of technical topics. So, pandemic is okay, it's just one topic. But otherwise, vaccine hesitancy is a big one now that we're having to deal with. But a lot of anti-science information out there, really confusing people. So I think it's, it is something for the future. We have to be, as I say always, this is the first pandemic in a social media era. And so we're having to deal with these new challenges, which we did not in the past, of this misinformation just spreading around the world so quickly. And in fact, it always spreads faster than, credible information. So it is a very big challenge. And we identified it as one of the top global health challenges, actually, way back before the pandemic in 2019. So yeah, good area to work on.
Right. So, well, the questions are flowing fast and furious now in the chat box, but, I'm cognizant of your time. So I think with your permission, Samya, we'll capture those questions and maybe send you a mail, and perhaps someone from your office could respond. That would be very helpful. I think with that, maybe, I'd like to thank you for taking the time. And I think, I think more people need to get to know about this, comprehensive document that your team has put out, and I'm sure this will become kind of a landmark guidance that the AI developer community is who we really deal with largely, and hopefully there's a there is some awareness on the ethics and the governance issues that comes into most of these groups now with this. So thank you very much, and for taking the time, and we'll be in touch. Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Thank you everyone for joining in, and I think we'll follow up later. Right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Vijay.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
So, Raghu, Bharadwaj, vote of thanks?
Yeah, I think.
Go ahead, Raghu. Why don't you start, and then I'll.
Actually, I think Shishir was supposed to do that. So.
Okay, go ahead.
All right. So yeah, so we are at the end of the CyPhySS Symposium 2021. So it has been a great symposium. So let me start thanking one by one. So the first thanks should obviously go to Raghu, who spearheaded the entire symposium, including the tutorials and today's session. So thanks a lot, Raghu, for your leadership and your great efforts in making this happen. I understand,
Very welcome. Yeah.
I understand the pain in sending repeated emails to all the speakers and having to deal with no response for a long time. Yeah, it's obviously difficult, but finally I think we pulled it off really greatly. So thanks a lot, Raghu, again. So along with Raghu, let me also thank Vaibhav, Ruth from IAC, Amit and Ravi from Art Park. So all four of you, thanks a lot. You supported Raghu really well. So managed a lot of things, helped with a lot of email interactions and so on and so forth. So thanks again to all of you. So should I clap hands every time? Yeah. So I request everyone to clap hands every time I say thank you. Okay. Special thanks to PhD Forum panelists, Pawan, Mukunda, and Aditya for being on time and making sure that you have given your marks. And have the awards been announced, Bharadwaj, or is it going to be separate?
No, actually you should be doing that now.
Oh, I should be? Okay. So maybe Bharadwaj, maybe you would like to
Yeah.
just
I don't know.
announce the winners, and then I will thank the remaining organizers.
Okay. We had this PhD forum, and I think it was a very interesting set of talks, and we had a review panel which selected the top two presentations, and the winners are Meenakshi Sarkar from Department of Aerospace Engineering. Her topic was
Hey.
deep visual prediction with decomposing camera and object motion. And the second winner is Sindhu Padakanla from Computer Science and Automation. And her topic was algorithms for challenges to real world reinforcement learning. So a hearty congratulations to both of them. I think,
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
yeah, and then Art Park is very glad to announce a prize of 50,000 rupees to each of you. And our Art Park team will be in touch with you to, do the logistics. I wish we had it live where we could probably give you, like in the IPL, check. Maybe next time we'll do it. So over to you, Shishir.
Okay, yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. And congratulations again to the winners. And definitely a big thank you to the other participants in the PhD Fora. Your participation was very, very important. So all of us listened to your talks. It was really good. Hopefully next year you can try again and maybe you can win it. Okay, so let me also thank session chairs, Jishnu, Amit for chairing the tutorials yesterday. And Bharadwaj, you again, Chiru, Shalab, and Yogesh for chairing the remaining sessions in the main symposium, which was today. Special thanks to Vijay Chandru for chairing the public lecture, which concluded just now. Even though it was late, I think it was great that we had it. And thank you all the speakers who actively participated in the symposium and made it a huge success. Website and publicity. So thank you, Subramani, Sridevi, Lavanya, Adil, Manjunath, Ipsita from IAC and Art Park. Website was updated continuously. So it was updated at lightning speed, which was great. So thank you, Subramani. And also the publicity was handled really well by the remaining team. So it was great. And last but not the least, thank you to the chairs, general chairs, Bharadwaj and Umakant. Thanks to you, we were able to pull in all the big speakers and made it a huge success. So, thank you, everyone. And finally, thank you to all the audience for staying so late. So with that, let me clap once and for all.
Yeah. And thank you, Shishir, for all your efforts too. You missed thanking yourself.
Thanks a lot. Yeah. Okay. So before we conclude, anyone has any final thoughts to say?
No, I think it's been 4 years now for the symposium, and it's
Actually, this is the 5th one, by the way.
fifth one, yeah. So this is the 5th edition, and we have been having excellent set of speakers. Really top world-class speakers in all these editions, and it's been an invitation only kind of symposium. But perhaps it is time now to think of also having perhaps more contributions from within the country. Maybe we can think of expanding the scope of the symposium,
Yes.
peer review type contributions and so on. Now that we have also set up 25 hubs under the ICPS mission. And we could also look to have this symposium maybe move around the country in different parts of the country, kind of like NCC, for example, the National Conference on Communications. That could be a model, or it could be in Bangalore. I don't know. It depends.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. By the way, we had 920 registrations for this conference.
We'll have more of such. I think this online really is very helpful. So in that sense, more people can participate. So thanks again to everyone, to all the organizers and all the participants. So we'll see again next year.
All right. Yeah. Thank you all. See you again next year.
And have a nice weekend.